MarioMon is a Pokemon ROM hack created by a small team and directed by Alpharad. It is a Pokemon game in which all of the Pokemon are Mario enemies, and if that sounds like something that you would enjoy, I'm here to tell you that you would enjoy it far more than you think that you would. This game is full of joy for those of us who have a lot of love for both Mario and Pokemon games. I don't tend to like ROM hacks that much. I've had some fun with randomizers, but that's all that I could really get into, and I've never even finished one before. If you grew up with both Mario and Pokemon and you're looking at the MarioMon ROM hack with skepticism, perhaps because you've had a bad experience or two with some shoddy fan-made ROM hacks in the past, or maybe you're just generally skeptical of how effectively Mario enemies can be translated into a Pokemon-style game, I would implore you to put that skepticism aside and play this ROM hack. MarioMon has given me so much childlike joy that it's become something that I want as many people who have attachments to these two properties to experience for themselves. Rediscovering a Mario enemy from your past while you're playing is an absolute joy, but that's just the start of it. Trying to guess what type it is based on what you know about the enemy from the games, trying to guess if it evolves, seeing that it does evolve and trying to guess what that evolution could possibly be, or seeing an enemy use a move or having an ability and smiling to yourself and being like, yeah, it makes so much sense for that enemy to have that. There's joy to be found in learning the base stats of some of these mons. There's joy in learning where you can catch them in the world map. There's joy in learning to get attached to a Mario enemy you never thought you'd get attached to. There's joy in hearing the cry the baddie makes when you send it out for battle, and that's to say nothing of the actual world the game is set in, with characters, Mario songs using the Gen 3 sound font, items, the humor, and so much more. There are several problems with MarioMon, don't get me wrong. It's not perfect by any stretch, but any problem, criticism, or bug that you could level at MarioMon is so easy to forgive because of the overflowing passion and love that went into everything else that this game has to offer. I think there are some very valid critiques of this game, some of which I'll make in this video, but all of those problems get outshined by all of the joy this game gave me. For me, making all these discoveries in-game was a huge reason why this ROM hack impacted me so much, and it's for that reason that I have very intentionally not shown you a lot of the enemies in this part of the video. I don't want to take that potential experience away from you. If you like both Mario and Pokemon and think that making those discoveries yourself would be a lot of fun for you, don't watch this video. Play the ROM hack instead. But if you still aren't convinced that you should give this game a try, I'm going to give you a few examples with some light spoilers for a few captures to try and convince you to try it out. Here's 3 captures out of the 151 captures in the game. This is Heave Ho. Do you recognize this enemy? You may not. He's an enemy found in Wet Dry World in Super Mario 64. I mean, I'm sure that you expected to see some enemies from the mainline Mario games, but did you expect to see a deep cut this specific from a mainline Mario game? Here's 2 more for you. Beanie and Virus. Beanie is from Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, and Virus is from the Dr. Mario games. So how about that? We don't just have mainline Mario representation, but we also have representation from the RPG spin-offs and other spin-offs as well. Now imagine all of the spin-offs that could be represented in this ROM hack, given that the creators paid homage to these titles. Yeah. When I first started playing this game, I knew that there was 151 captures to discover, and I remember feeling sort of subconsciously that that number didn't seem too high, and I'm not entirely sure why I felt that way. Maybe it's because when I started playing Pokemon there were already well over 400 at that point. I guess by comparison 151 doesn't feel like a lot, but after playing through the game, 151 is a lot. This is a Tattledex that feels full and beautifully well-rounded. I love this ROM hack. I want you to play it if you haven't. If you aren't bothered by spoilers for these kinds of games, then feel free to watch the rest of the video, but if you think there's even a slight chance that you could get some joy out of making these discoveries for yourself, don't watch this video. Again, play the ROM hack for yourself. This is the end of the review portion of the video. Full spoilers ahead. I am a Pokemon fan, but I'm a Mario fan first and foremost. I specifically had an attachment to Mario enemies growing up for some reason. I was able to name every single enemy at one point in my life. I started with Super Mario 64, played lots of Mario Kart and Mario Party, New Super Mario Bros., several Mario and Luigi games, Paper Mario, and the rest of the mainline 3D games. I haven't finished all of the Mario and Luigi games, I haven't played most of the Mario games that came out before 64, and I haven't played much of Dr. Mario or WarioWare either. My biases tend to lean towards Super Mario 64 and New Super Mario Bros., specifically the first one on the DS. Those are the Mario games that tend to mean the most to me, as I'm sure you'll notice as we go through these captures. Just thought I should acknowledge those biases beforehand. The Mario representation of MarioMon, specifically the enemy representation and how those enemies translate into Pokemon, is going to be the primary focus of this video. But I think the Pokemon representation is worth going over as well. I would probably describe this game as the world, characters, and enemies of Mario squeezed into a Pokemon mold. I think that's a fair way to describe it. And looking at the design choices of some of these captures, I can see a lot of tough decisions the creators had to make in order to fit these enemies into a Pokemon mold. Picking the typing for a lot of these enemies could seem like a pretty easy task for a lot of cases. Piranha Plant is a grass type, Cheep is a water type, etc, etc. But some of these creatures are very much not so cut and dry. Should a Goomba be a normal type? Or a grass type? I mean, mushrooms aren't really plants, but mushrooms in Pokemon are represented as grass types. But also, Goombas don't really feel like plants when you're playing Mario, you know? If it's this difficult to come up with the perfect typing for a Goomba, the most like fundamental Mario enemy, how much easier is the rest of the roster going to be to design realistically? And it's not just about picking the right type that fits the vibe of the creature, right? It's also about picking typing that takes into consideration game balance, and trying to prevent too many captures from feeling samey. That's another thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Both Scuttlebug and Wiggler used to be bug fighting types, but they changed the Scuttlebug's typing to be bug water instead to help Scuttlebug and Wiggler feel differentiated. But then Scuttlebug doesn't really feel like a water type, so can we really win here? It's really hard. I'm saying all this because I can tell that a lot of thought went into the decision making for a lot of these capture designs. And the thing is, any criticism that I give is almost certainly a criticism that the MarioMon team has already thought of long before I thought about it. There might be a balance or lore or vibe related reason that a decision was made for a specific capture that I don't know about. And I'm going to try and take that into consideration going through all of these. So as you're hearing me criticize the game, I hope that you can simultaneously hear the love that I have for the game in my criticisms. It is to be expected that pushing Mario into a Pokemon mold won't produce a perfect product. You should be going into this experience with that expectation anyway, right? It only makes sense. With that said, I'm also going to link Alpharad's videos on this game because they contain nuggets of developer commentary that I found to be very insightful. You've probably already seen those videos if you're watching this one, but whatever. Continuing on the trend of thinking of problems that the developers probably faced, typing isn't the only thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Stat distribution is pretty dang important too. There are a lot of physical attackers in this game, so especially defensive walls end up losing a lot of value, and physical walls, as well as captures with the ability Intimidate, have a lot of value. So much so that the developers had to take the ability Intimidate away from several captures for balance. And it's hard, right? Like, you can't just turn a Thwomp, a Bully, a Bruiser into a special attacker. You guys have played a Mario game before. These guys give off higher attack stat than special attack stat vibes, right? You can't just swap someone's stats over purely for balance. It has to make some sense, right? You can't just take away the ability Intimidate from a Chain Chomp for the sake of balance. That ability works too well there. The act of balancing the game to be fair, along with balancing what we know deep down the capture should be like in a Pokemon context, seems genuinely hard to me. It's going to take a lot of work to strike a balance between making the game fair and properly representing the enemies in the way that they should be. I think that the developers deserve a lot more credit for thinking through that sort of task and tackling it the way that they did. Capture Evolution is another fun balancing game that we should talk about. The developers did a really good job of fitting the Mario enemies into the mold of Pokemon with this respect. There's good balance between captures that don't evolve once, or evolve twice. But this is the part where things things start to really break down and you can start to see some cracks. Some of these evolutions feel like stretches, and there wasn't really any avoiding it. The two examples that come to mind for me are Mecha Koopa evolving into Mecha Chomp and Ghost Mouse evolving into Twirler. When I look at Mecha Koopa, do I think that it could evolve into a Mecha Chomp purely on vibes? I don't know, not really. I have to squint to see it. They have the same typing, so that's good. They're both robots. Yeah, you know, I guess that works. When I played Luigi's Mansion, I didn't really feel like the Ghost Mouse would eventually become Twirler, but I guess they've got that same shade of blue, and they're both from the same game, so screw it. I'll let it pass, you know what I mean? To drive home this point with a personal anecdote, I remember catching a Ghost Mouse, and sometime later, in another area, I ran into a wild Twirler and caught him as well. And only then did I discover that Ghost Mouse actually evolves into Twirler. And it took me by surprise, to be honest. That evolution doesn't seem super obvious to me, but when you're pushing Mario into a Pokemon mold, I can absolutely see how this sort of thing would probably be wise and necessary. I mean, the alternative is to have each of these captures be single evolutions. And on one hand, that could be cool to give them their own identity, and maybe it would feel more accurate to Mario, but it would feel much less accurate to Pokemon. Because then there would be too many captures that don't evolve, and the ideal Tattledex is going to have a healthy balance of captures that do and don't evolve. One of the things that surprised me was some of the gimmick Pokemon designs that the MarioMon team decided they wanted to adapt from the Pokemon side of things. Castform, Slacking, Shedinja, Zoroark, Ditto, Wishiwashi, Mimikyu, and Eevee all have MarioMon variants, to name a few. And this is a creative decision that I'm not sure that I would have tried to do myself, but I respect it. Some of these make great sense to me. Snoozorb is great Mario and Luigi representation, but it's also great Truant representation. I have never finished Partners in Time, which I really should do, but this is a great option for that particular gimmick. Yoshi is the EV for this game, and I think it works out well enough. It's not what I would have done, but if you're going to have a Mario version of Eevee, Yoshi isn't a bad choice. Alpharad also mentioned that he believed that Eevee should evolve if you choose not to evolve it after several levels, so Yub is in the game as an option as well. I think that's a cool way to represent Eevee with a twist. This evolution tree doesn't feel perfect, but it feels alright. It's pretty good. Dry Bones is an interesting one. Dry Bones is the Shedinja of this game, and interestingly, you get him the same way that you get Shedinja, by evolving another Pokemon and having an open slot in your party. This makes more sense for the lore of Shedinja than Dry Bones. Alpharad even makes a joke about it in his video, so they're self-aware that this evolution doesn't really make sense, which probably indicates that this creative decision intentionally prioritizes the Pokemon representation over the Mario representation. Dry Bones having Wonder Guard does make a lot of sense though, especially if you've fought a Dry Bones or two in Paper Mario, for example. The evolution tree here is just, you know. But with Hammer Bro, I'm not quite as satisfied. Hammer Bro is the cast form of this game. He changes forms depending on the weather. This is not remotely how any Hammer Bro works in any Mario game that I'm aware of, and it feels like Hammer Bro has been shoved into this gimmick in a way that takes away too much of his essence. I can certainly see the desire to have representation for Fire, Ice, and Boomerang Bros if you're going to have Hammer Bros in your game, but this feels wrong to me. Personally, I would have done away with the forecast idea and had the Hammer Bros used in one of two ways. Firstly, as a sort of extra set of starters that the player gets to balance out their team. Think of Panseer, Panpour, and Pansage from Black and White, for example. They're just separate captures that could be used to help balance out the team a little bit, and maybe they could even evolve into a sledge version of each kind through level up. There's also a part of me that feels like they would be good trainers who carry captures instead of being the captures themselves. I'm imagining in a beach you would run into Boomerang Bro trainers, or in Bowser's Castle you run into Fire Bro trainers, and maybe in the Ice Tower there could be Ice Bro trainers. The Hammer Bros feel kinda similar to the Koopa Trolls, and the Koopa Trolls are trainers, so I feel like the Hammer Bros could fit right in as trainers, but then again, Hammer Bros are also very iconic Mario enemies, and being able to have them on your party does kinda sound better, doesn't it? Hammer Bro was probably very difficult to translate to MarioMon. I personally would not have taken the forecast route, but it's okay, they did their best. If I can take you back to the beginning of the decks, I'd like to talk about Goomba for a bit. I talked briefly about Goomba's typing, and I think normal is probably the best option they could have gone for. But I also want to mention Goomba's evolution line because I think this gives us a lot of important insight into what the devs were thinking when designing this dex. On the surface, this evolution doesn't seem noteworthy, but I think it speaks volumes to the self-control the designers of this game had. Goomba Stack is a perfectly acceptable evolution stage, but I can tell you that 14-year-old me would be frothing at the mouth looking at this, trying to think of all the possible final evolution options that Goomba has. I probably would have put Goomboss at the end of this evolution tree, because I mean, it makes so much sense, right? Bob-omb eventually becomes King Bob-omb, Boo eventually becomes King Boo, so Goomba becoming Goomboss makes too much sense, right? But think about it. These devs know who Goomboss is. There's no way they didn't think about it at some point. But you know what a healthy Pokédex tends to have? Pokemon found on Route 1 that aren't insanely strong and leave room for incredible Pokemon down the line. This evolution line represents a sort of self-control that I really appreciate. It's possible that I'm reading too much into this, but like, I think this is the best sort of thing that they could have done for the overall health of the Tattledex. There are hundreds of different kinds of Goombas, and some of them are crazy strong and would be a fantastic fit for a third evolution slot, but this feels so perfect for a Route 1-1 encounter. And I think it speaks volumes to the design philosophy for the entire dex. It's not obvious to me that all Pokemon should be balanced with the goal in mind of making everyone viable in Smogon OU. I think it's good that some Pokemon aren't good, even if I can't fully articulate why that is. And I get the sense that the developers of MarioMon understand the idea that I'm trying to get at least on some level. Another thing worth mentioning while we're talking about Goombas is the different variants of Goombas that exist. This is another interesting obstacle that I suspect the developers had to overcome while putting together a balanced roster. There are hundreds of different kinds of Goombas, and this isn't a problem that regular Pokemon designers face. It isn't just a question of should there be a final evolution for the Goomba, or can we squeeze an extra evolution stage in here somewhere? It's also about questioning whether or not it's wise to bloat the Tattledex with separate evolution lines for maximum representation. Like, just as an example, part of me loves this guy from Bowser's Inside Story. Choomba. He's like a volcano Goomba. Wouldn't that be awesome? He could be like a rock fire capture that's a variant of Goomba. Wouldn't this make such a great capture? Maybe not as like the final evolution of Goomba, but like as a separate capture found somewhere else. See, I'm not so sure that that's true necessarily. Pokemon does have Alolan or Galarian forms, for example, to change up other Pokemon, but that didn't happen for quite a few generations. For the developers of Pokemon, if they want a cool Fire Rock type, they don't have to adhere to a source material that requires them to make a Fire Rock Raticate, for example. They can just create their own Fire Rock type. There's a part of me that thinks Choomba would be such a cool addition to the roster. But there's a bigger part of me that is glad that Choomba isn't a part of the roster at all. At least, not yet. Having just plain Goombas, no Galoombas, no emotional Goombas, no fat Goombas, was absolutely the right call in my book. Adding in Choomba to the roster of captures sounds like a wonderful temptation, but by not giving in to that temptation, the Tattledex feels more pure? Is that the right word? It speaks to some sort of self-control that the MarioMon team has, and I respect it so much. This isn't to say that different forms couldn't exist at some point for the future of MarioMon. Heck, you could probably argue that Bully has an Alolan form, but you need to be careful with this sort of thing, because there are far more alternative forms you could make for Mario enemies than with Pokemon. The floodgates could easily come rushing in, and you would have a lot to deal with. But as of right now, there's so much control being exercised over the Goomba line. No Goomboss, no other forms of Goomba to be seen in the Tattledex, and there's just an elegance to that, you know? And this example is emblematic of the same type of control that we can see throughout this Tattledex. Koopa isn't a bad example for this either. The dry bones thing is a little weird, but we have a solid flying type here. Perfect Route 1-1 encounter. They could have taken the Koopa line further or in a different direction. I'm sure at some point the developers thought of having Koopa Troopa evolve into Hammer Bro, and then having the Hammer Bro evolve into a Sledgehammer Bro, but they didn't. Probably because having a regular old flying type rounded out the Tattledex a lot better. I love this decision. Cheep Cheep is obviously a perfect water type to be fishing up with an old rod. It fills that Goldeen archetype pretty well here. The evolutions are a bit more complicated because there are several options that they could have chosen from, but the evolution line they stuck with is pretty solid. I maybe would have had the Cheep Cheep line only evolve to Cheep Chomp and then have it end there, then take out Porcupuffer and replace it with an Urchin as a standalone for broader representation. But this is a perfectly fine evolution tree as it is. I think the primary reason that my mind wants to make this adjustment is because I'm not sure how I feel about Cheep Cheep eventually becoming a water poison type, especially when we have Glooper Blooper in the game. But that's mostly a vibes thing, so there's not really any concrete criticisms that I have for this line. It's pretty solid. Podoboo evolving into Blarg is pretty dang cool. They were apparently going for a Magikarp into Gyarados sort of thing here. It sounded like Blarg was a nightmare to balance, but the representation here is mostly solid. In my playthrough of this game, I actually missed the NPC who gives you Podoboo, so I never actually ran into one throughout my entire playthrough. Part of me wishes they were more common somehow, like if there was a precursor to the Bowser level towards the middle where I could see them more often. At the very least, I would have expected some of Bowser's minions to have Podoboo for a trainer battle. In games like New Super Mario Bros., for example, you see Podoboo quite a bit because each world is punctuated with a few Bowser castles. If there was a brief Bowser takeover at some point halfway through the game's story, maybe Podoboo could have been implemented into the game in a way that feels approximately as common as he does in the Mario games. He certainly doesn't feel as common as Magikarp does in Pokemon, if that's what they were going for. I managed to beat the champion without seeing a Podoboo once, and that felt kinda wrong, you know? Also, I don't fully understand Lava Drop in this game. It seems like he's more of a Yoshi's Island representation, if I'm not mistaken. I probably need to play those games in order to get it, but as it stands, Podoboo and Lava Drop feel kinda redundant in the Tattledex. Maybe I'm just missing something though. Biddybud and Parabiddybud are great additions for the early game as well. They don't have as many variants as Goombas and Koopas, so their implementation was probably pretty straightforward. I like that the Parabiddybud are grouped together as one capture. That feels very appropriate. Shy Guys are implemented pretty well. I especially love the move pool the developers gave them. It feels so perfect, man. Though my Super Mario 64 bias is absolutely showing when I say that the version that I grew up with could fly, but it's totally fine as it is. I love that Fuzzy is the schooling capture of this game. I'm reminded of that one Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door boss in particular. I really like Monty Mole's evolution as well. The first variant seems to be the Super Mario 64 variant, followed by what I assume is more of the Super Mario World variant, and then ends with a Super Mario Galaxy boss. Sometimes when you put Mario into that Pokemon mold, the evolution trees span multiple completely different Mario games, and I think that works just fine here. Monty Mole also just feels like a fantastic early game ground type encounter. The Thwomp family is a personal favorite of mine. If this game had begun production after Mario Wonder came out, I wonder if Shoomp would have made an appearance as a pre-evolution to Thwomp, but Thwimp also makes so much sense. Womp is a personal favorite enemy of mine. I have a history with this guy, and I love Womp so much as one of my favorite Mario enemies. But the ground rock typing is one of my least favorite typings in all of Pokemon. As such, I ended up skipping out on using him, but I'm still glad that he's here and I understand why they went with that typing. One of the first moments I realized I loved the direction this game was going in was when I visited Peach's garden and thought to myself, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could run into some boos here, just like in Mario 64? And I remember right as I finished that thought, I ran into a wild boo that would eventually help take me through the Elite Four and Champion. It's moments like that that truly make this ROM hack special. When people say Balloon Boo, personally I'm thinking of the new Super Mario Bros. Version, because I'm biased like that, but I don't seem to be alone in that regard because when searching for the Balloon Boo, I can't even find which game he's from. Alpharad talked about how having King Boo made sense as an evolution, but having King Boo too early would have been a bit much. And I agree, having a middle evolution was absolutely the way to go, even if Balloon Boo feels a bit out of place here. The alternative could have been having Peepa be in the game and having Peepa evolve into Boo and then having Boo evolve into King Boo, or maybe just having Boo evolve into King Boo much later, but this is probably the best way to play. I also appreciate that King Boo seems to be the Luigi's Mansion version as well. Dino Torch and Dino Rhino are fantastic pieces of Mario representation, Rex is also fabulous with the defeatist ability getting squashed at 50% health, and having a separate sprite for when this ability is activated is pretty brilliant. Crazy Daisy is great Paper Mario representation, but I wonder if they should have let Amazy Daisy stay as a rare shiny instead of an evolution. And for fun, maybe give this specific shiny a bunch of special differences, give tons of XP, and maybe make shinies for that specific capture more common to compensate? It's an idea, but I have a feeling that the way that they went is probably the better path overall. Bullet Bill is represented pretty perfectly in my opinion. I also really like how bullet bills are used to indicate to players that shinies are in fact in this game. I don't think adding King Bill to this lineup was really needed by any stretch. The pure steel type is pretty solid. I don't think that the flying type was needed. Levitate was added to this capture, and I think that makes sense, but I don't think Levitate was needed either. There are plenty of Pokemon that look like they are flying or floating, but aren't. I think the bills could be fine without the Levitate ability if they decided not to go that way, but I'm not complaining either way. Bruiser made me so happy, man. The new Super Mario Bros. Bias is really showing here. I love that Bruiser is in this game. I never got to catch one, but the fact that it's here makes me happy enough. Buzzy Beetle evolving into Spike Top was an interesting choice for sure. With the name Beetle in the title, you would think that we have a bug type on our hands, but we don't. I don't mind it this way, and honestly, while I've always thought of Spike Tops as a separate species, they are just kind of better in every way, so I guess it kind of makes sense for them to evolve from Buzzy Beetles. The stats match this capture perfectly, and I love how the sprite depicts it as upside down on a brick. Spiny and Lakitu, on the other hand, are not so much my jam. I understand why Spiny would evolve into Lakitu, but I don't like it, and I don't think it's a great representation of the enemies. I feel like they're pretty clearly distinct creatures, even though that might be up for debate, and I'm also not totally stoked about Lakitu being a steel flying type just because he's holding a steel bug. I think that a straight flying type would have better represented Lakitu, and having him evolve into the boss from New Super Mario Bros. For an electric flying type would have been even better. The Galaxy boss would have worked as well, I suppose. I feel like Spiny would have been better represented as part of the Buzzy Beetle line somewhere, maybe on a split evolution or something. Or maybe Spiny would have been better as a solo act. Again, I understand why they took the path they did with this one, but it really doesn't sit right with me. I love Pokey as a ground grass type. They probably could have gotten away with having Pokey not evolve at all and I would have been happy, to be honest. That may have worked out perfectly fine for him. Again, with my new Super Mario Bros. Bias, I was hoping that he would evolve into the second world boss there. I thought that would have been phenomenal representation, but Paper Mario representation is more than okay. The poison typing is really cool, and I ended up using it on my team. I got pretty attached. I love some toxic spikes, so I had some good fun with my Pokey. But I still would have preferred the new Super Mario Bros. Boss. That's just me though. I love Cataquack. I have no idea why I love Cataquack, but I just do. Maybe it's the name, that might actually just be it. I just like the name Cataquack. I think it really rolls off the tongue. I want to main this thing in Mario Kart World, and I was so delighted to see Cataquack here as well. The water fighting type felt perfect. I remember catching one, looking at the Tattledex entry, and noticed that Cataquack evolved at a fairly late level. And I remember trying to think, what on earth would a Cataquack evolve into? I figured that Cataquack would just be a solo no evolution kind of capture. I remember racking my brain trying to remember if I had like forgotten about a secret Cataquack boss in Super Mario Sunshine or something, but it wasn't until I saw Plungello that I was reminded that they existed and that they could potentially make sense as relatives of the Cataquack. It wasn't until I saw one in game that I finally remembered flinging those things into the sky in Sunshine. I'm glad that Plungello is here. However, I don't like that Cataquack evolves into Plungello. I think this evolutionary tree should be reversed for a few reasons. Firstly, Plungello feels less developed and less capable in combat when compared to Cataquack. He doesn't even have a bill. Is the implication that Cataquack lost his bill with age? Wouldn't it make more sense for the bill to come in after evolving? Secondly, while I can see Cataquack having a fighting type and having that make sense, I can't see Plungello as a fighting type. And lastly, Cataquack is a lot more iconic than Plungello. Now, how how iconic a Mario enemy is probably shouldn't dictate whether or not they should be the final evolution. Goomba is probably more iconic than Goomba Stacked, for example, but for reasons that are hard for me to describe, I feel like that metric should factor into the Cataquack line. I just don't want my Cataquack to evolve, you know? I don't like Plungello nearly as much, and I just want to have a Cataquack, man. Maybe there's something about Plungello that I don't remember. I haven't played Sunshine in a long time, but I really believe that Cataquack should either not evolve at all, or should be the evolved form of Plungello. Bullies are in this game, and I love bullies. They take on the Mario 3D World look, and I'll accept it even if I prefer the Super Mario 64 ones. They also use the noise that bullies make in Super Mario 64 as the cry, so I'm very happy about that. Bully does not evolve, and I think that's fair. There are bigger bullies out there in the games, but in the world of Pokemon, you can't just make a Pokemon bigger and call it an evolution. But maybe in Bully's case, you could get away with making a bigger version using the two different styles from 64 and 3D World. Like have this bully evolve into the big bully with the Super Mario 64 design, or vice versa. This isn't needed though, to be clear. I just really like Super Mario 64 bullies. I do kind of feel that way about chill bullies though. I have never seen this kind of chill bully before with the multiple spikes on their head. But if this thing evolved into Chief Chili with that one horn, oh man, that would make me so happy. This evolution would be very justified in my estimation. I'm also pretty happy with the typings that these captures got. I think there would be a temptation to give bullies the fire typing because they're often associated with lava or living in very hot places, at least to me, but giving them the fire type wouldn't really make any sense. Rock works just fine. Maybe you could make the case for steel, but this is more than okay. Ice Rock also makes sense, even if I hate that typing enough to not use it. The Gusheen line is such a delightful addition, man. I love the Scald user of this game. The water fire typing is so cool, and this is the perfect capture for that. I also really appreciate the T-Rex. It's so out of place, but I guess it's kind of out of place in Mario Odyssey too. Seeing Klepto made me very happy. I kind of feel like I should have been seeing him in the desert world, but I loved his addition nonetheless. I think the ground typing is okay, but I'm not completely sold on it. A dark type could have been applicable here, honestly. Maybe that would be a bit too derivative of Mandibuzz though. Same goes for Kiki here. Seeing this turd who always took my hat in Super Mario 64 makes me happy, but again, not sold on the ground type. In Kiki's case, I get the sense that there were a bit too many plain normal types, so the ground typing was probably mostly there to help him stand out. That's probably the case to a certain degree with Klepto too. I was so happy to see Stroll Stew in this game. He's such a perfect Goomba that isn't quite a Goomba. They made the decision to not have him evolve, which might be fair. I wonder if having him evolve into Swipe and Stew, for example, could have been a good idea. I'm not mad at this though. Actually, Stroll Stew could have totally been another Eevee of this game if you really wanted him to be. Yoshi was a better choice though, that's just a thought I had. Wiggler is here, and he has Anger Point, which makes sense to a degree. They gave him a separate sprite for when he's mad, and I love that. I think Wiggler is a good example of a capture they should have just created a custom ability for that makes him mad after one hit, or maybe one physical hit. I don't think getting mad exclusively when they get hit with a critical hit fits Wiggler. Wiggler is also a bug fighting type, and while I kinda get what they were going for, I think that plain bug works better for this guy. Sometimes when you're creating Pokemon, you just shouldn't be afraid of the single typing. I'm sure the devs of this game are well aware of that, but I think Wiggler would be plenty interesting as just a pure bug type. And maybe consider giving the fighting type back to Scuttlebug. Oh, also, may I humbly suggest having Wiggler evolve into the giant green Wiggler from Sunshine? It's purely a suggestion. I have no idea if that would actually be a good idea or not, but I think it could be cool, personally. When I saw Lil Spark for the first time, I was so happy. It was neat seeing Watt from Paper Mario, and it made me wonder what other Paper Mario friends could be cool captures. When I saw that he evolved into something, I was kinda hoping for Amp. Though again, that's my Super Mario 64 New Super Mario Bros. Bias speaking. Spark is alright, even if he has a little bit less character than Amp, in my opinion. When I think of Mario spiders, I tend to think of the new Super Mario Bros. Yellow and purple guys you can jump on, but I'm glad that the spiders that we have instead are the Sprangler and Tarantox spiders from Super Mario Galaxy. This makes so much more sense in my opinion. The new Super Mario Bros. Scuttlebug doesn't really evolve into anything, so this is perfect. Glad I'm not in charge of this project. Bonefish is also a great addition. When I first saw him, I wondered if the giant Bonefish from Galaxy was going to be usable, but the devs made the decision to keep Bonefish at one stage. It's like I said before, you can't just take a Pokemon, make it bigger, and call it an evolution. I wonder if that's why we didn't get the big Bonefish. The Angry Sun and Happy Moon are delightful to see here. I was so happy to see that they actually put the Angry Sun in the game. I wasn't sure if they would. But also, the Happy Moon is specifically from Mario Maker 2, if I'm not mistaken. In Mario Maker 2, they had to make a counterpart to the Angry Sun for the nighttime levels. I really have to commend them for thinking about this. I would have completely skipped over this opportunity. Personally, I would get rid of the dark type for a pure fairy type on the moon, but this is still really cool. Muncher is one of those captures that I grew to love specifically because of this game. Initially, I thought that Nipper would be a pre-evolution to Piranha Plant, but Nipper and Muncher being on a separate evolution tree from Piranha Plant was a really good decision on their part, in my opinion. It's another one of those things where I'm kinda glad that I wasn't in charge because this decision was pretty great. Muncher got me through so much of the early game. It's one of those enemies that I look at more fondly because of my experiences with it in this game. Mad Piano's inclusion is emblematic of the kind of love and passion that the MarioMon team put into this game, man. I'm so happy it's here. It has Intimidate, which is so perfect. The sprite is delightful. On my first playthrough, I accidentally one-shot it before I could catch it because I assumed that it was a Ghost Steel type, but I really like the plain Ghost typing on it. No notes, 10 out of 10. Freezy evolving into Mr. Blizzard is probably one of those evolutions that shouldn't work, but for some reason I don't mind this one as much. I was pretty dang happy to see their inclusion, as well as the inclusion of Heave Ho and Mr. I, living for all the Super Mario 64 representation here. And it doesn't end there. We also have Skeeter. Despite having many different designs throughout the Mario franchise, Skeeter is in his Super Mario 64 form, and I really love how his Tattledex entry references the odd vibes of Wet Dry World. But what's kinda interesting is that he evolves into Scuttlebug, also the version from Super Mario 64. I don't know how I feel about this evolution. It doesn't feel quite right to me. Scuttlebug is smaller and feels rather unrelated to Skeeter. But the real reason I don't feel a lot of hate towards this evolution is probably because I used Scuttlebug during my playthrough and it ended up being my most used capture of my entire first playthrough. I even swept part of the champion fight with him. I never thought that I'd get attached to the spider that liked to pop out of holes in Hazy Maze Cave, but I kinda love him now. The X-Nauts were interesting for sure. When you know your Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door, you can probably imagine a pretty easy evolution path that these guys can take. But the devs didn't go in that direction, opting to have X-Nauts evolve into Elite X-Nauts. I don't like this decision. Perhaps there are lore-related reasons they wanted to go in this direction, but I can remember evolving my X-Naut and wondering what it was going to turn into, and while it was evolving, noticing its silhouette staying the exact same. That was kind of a disappointing feeling. You know how you can't just make a Pokemon bigger and call it an evolution? I think it's also the case that you can't just recolor a Pokemon and call it an evolution. Would you do this to Koopa Troopa by having all the green-shelled Koopas evolve into red-shelled Koopas? Probably not, right? I honestly don't like how X-Nauts were implemented at all. If they didn't want them evolving into Lord Chump or Grotus, I think they'd be better left out of the game entirely. Phanto's addition was one of my favorites to see. The Dark Fairy typing feels perfect. The high speed stat feels perfect. I didn't expect to run into one, and I was so delighted when I actually did. Exor and Entasma are fantastic additions as legendaries. Super Mario RPG and Mario & Luigi Dream Team are both games that have very little to no representation so far, and what better way to make up for that lack of representation than by giving them legendary slots. The Hooktail Trio, I'm not as sold on. There do tend to be legendary trios in Pokemon games, like the bird trio or the cat trio or the rock trio, but I think that these Pokemon tend to be smaller, both physically and impact-wise. My gut tells me that Hooktail by itself would have been a fantastic encounter, but the other two kind of feel like they lessen the impact of Hooktail's presence. The Hooktail trio feels more like Hooktail with 2 reskins, whereas the legendary birds, for example, don't feel like reskins of each other, you know? Oh, and Sonic is a fantastic and hilarious idea for a post-game legendary. You have to be careful with this sort of thing because when you do stuff like this, you start hearing people go, okay, well, what about Kirby? What about Link? What about Mega Man? And before you know it, your audience is expecting Super Smash Mon from you. But if they just keep it at Sonic, I think they can absolutely get away with this one. I mean, if they want to make Smash Mon, by all means. Goodness knows there's plenty of Kirby bad guys that could be made into Pokemon. But I do think that having the self-control to keep things contained to the Mario baddies is really wise. That's what I would prefer anyway. I haven't gone over every single capture in this game, and if I've skipped over your favorite, that's probably because I have nothing to add, no notes or anything. They're all just pretty much flawless. And any of the criticisms that you've heard here have probably already been thought of by these developers. And again, anything that I don't like gets massively overshadowed by the things that I do like. I hope that nobody is interpreting any of this as malice. I love this game, even if I am a bit of a snob at the end of the day. Speaking of being a snob though, there are actually 9 captures in particular that I haven't addressed yet, and I feel like I probably should now because you've probably been wondering why I haven't addressed them yet. I'm talking of course about the starter captures, which I've intentionally decided to save for last. The starters are, in my opinion, the worst part of this entire Capturepedia, and I'd like to explain why I feel that way with some qualifiers. First things first, the developers behind this ROM hack made the intentional creative decision to follow the unspoken rules about Pokemon starters. The rules that are relevant for our discussion here are as follows. There have to be 3 starters. The starters have to be fire, water, and grass type respectively. Each starter has to have 3 evolution stages, and each starter has to be so rare and special that you can't obtain them outside of picking the starter at the beginning of the game, barring some post-game related content. Now, I'm going to be repeating this a bit for this section of the video for emphasis, but if you wanted to make a Pokemon game with Mario enemies, and you determined that you were going to commit to the creative decision to follow these starter rules, these 3 starters are probably almost the best outcome that you could come up with. And given that they wanted to follow these rules, they did a good job with the materials that they had. They did good given these limitations. I believe, however, that these rules ended up hurting these captures' representation in the long run. Let's take Rule 2, for example, the water, fire, and grass typing requirement. Piranha Plant being a grass type makes great sense, obviously, same for Blooper being a water type. But do you think of Bomb as a fire type? Like, I guess I can see it if I squint my eyes enough. There's a little flame on his fuse, which is kinda reminiscent of the Charmander tail. And explosions certainly give off an immense amount of heat. But I don't know, man, you really have to squint to see it. For me personally, if I was tasked to assign a type to Bomb, and I had no idea that he would have to be a starter, my first instinct would be electric. Probably because of the wind-up on its back, and because the Pokemon equivalent of an explosive, Electrode is also an electric type. You could argue that the electric typing only works with Bomb if you squint your eyes too, and I'd agree with you. The thing is, while there are plenty of Pokemon that don't wear their typing on their sleeve, each Pokemon starter is pretty obviously the type it's been given. You're not trying to guess if Cyndaquil is a fire type, for example. But even if I accept that Bomb is a fire type, That's fine. I don't feel like I can accept that Chukya is a fire type though. A fighting type? Sure, but I don't think there's much fire going on here. I guess when Mario throws Chukya in 64, he explodes, but I don't think that's the same kind of explosion that bombs have. Like, I don't think it does any damage or anything in the game, correct me if I'm wrong though. And when we get to King Bob-omb, I just feel like the firefighting type has been forced onto him in an unfair way. He doesn't have a fuse. The only relationship he has to fire is the heat caused by an explosion. The fighting type feels more appropriate to Chukya. The fighting type on King Bob-omb just doesn't quite sit right with me. I feel as though there would be better types out there for King Bob-omb, but because of this rule, that doesn't really matter, does it? While we're on the topic of Bob-omb's evolution line, can we talk about Chukya? I love that Chukya has representation in this game. I love Super Mario 64, and this is the kind of capture that I'm delighted to see. But I really feel like he would have been given better justice if he was separated from this evolution line. I really wish that Chukya was a standalone capture that didn't evolve and just had a straight fighting type. Again, I can squint and see the similarities. Both Chukya and King Bob-omb throw you in the exact same way, and Mario picks them up and throws them in the exact same way. But the similarities really begin and end there, you know? And it's for this reason that I believe that Chukya got shafted more than any other capture in this game. And that kinda hurts my feelings, but it is what it is. The other evolution lines make some sense. Blooper evolves into a variant of Blooper found in Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, and then evolves into Glooper Blooper from Super Mario Sunshine. I kinda like that the Blooper's evolution line encompasses 2D Mario, Mario RPGs, and 3D Mario. There's some pretty cool representation in this line. Piranha Plant is interesting. He evolves into Pee-wee Piranha from Super Mario Galaxy 2, then he evolves into Petey Piranha. This middle stage is a bit weird to me. I can appreciate it, but I think that it would have made more sense for the giant spiky piranha from Galaxy or something instead. Petey Piranha as the third evolution is kind of the must pick, right? Part of me wondered if they would go the Piranha Dino route with the Grass Dragon typing, because that would have felt more natural with this evolution line, especially if they were committing to Pee-wee. So rule 3 of forcing these guys to evolve twice is kinda causing some weird clashes, and some of these secondary evolutions especially feel a bit out of place. Some of them feel like they want to go in one direction on the second stage of evolution, but then swap to a completely different direction on the third stage of evolution. But I really want to dial in on rule number 4, that being that these creatures have to be rare by virtue of how special they are supposed to be as starters. This is what really hurts the world of MarioMon for me. Not just these starters, but like the whole world of MarioMon. Because think about it, these Mario enemies shouldn't be one of a kind in a Mario world, right? I'd love to see the world populated with piranha plants. They should be all over World 1, in DK's Island. I'd love to run into a wild blooper while I'm surfing in between Cheep Cheep and Skeeter encounters. Bloopers have been in the game since day 1 of Mario. I should be running into them in the wild, man. Maybe this is less so the case for Bob-ombs, but even Bob-ombs show up as basic enemies in Super Mario 64. Sticking to Rule 4 here really impacts the authenticity of some of these captures and the entire world that the whole game is set in. But so, what exactly is the solution here? Are there alternative starter lookalikes in the Mario world? I don't really think so. Cheep Cheep shouldn't be a starter, he's too basic. Potaboo? That doesn't feel like a starter. No, honestly, I really feel like the developers chose the best starter options from all of the Mario enemies. Do we just not follow starter rules? Part of me feels like following these starter rules is so harmful to how these Mario baddies should be represented that I kinda want to break some starter rules, man. Do a mystery dungeon quiz and have a selection of certain starters. But I get it, this isn't Mario Mystery Dungeon Mon. That's the next ROM hack they're working on, I'm pretty sure. Another alternative is you could have all of the non-starter captures stay as they are, be perfectly accurate depictions from the games, and have all of the creative freedom to make up whatever starters you want. Like, just keep the creative freedom to the starter specifically. Like, you could have a grass-type Fuzzy, a fire-type Shy Guy, a water-type Luma. Then you can easily follow the starter rules by exercising the freedom you have in customizing the second and third evolutions of each of them, without having to worry about drawing from a source material so that they feel more natural. And then you don't have to worry about the loss of immersion due to how you can't find them naturally anywhere else because they're made up. And that gives them the freedom to be unique and rare without being beholden to certain population expectations. This solution solves a lot of issues, but it also doesn't feel like it fits the design philosophy of what the developers were going for, and fair enough. At the end of the day, the starters suffer the most from the Pokemon mold that the Mario enemies are being shoved into. That's my belief, anyway. But it seems as though that was a sacrifice that the MarioMon team was willing to make, and fair enough. Given the fact that they committed to that decision, they did a good job. Except for Chuckya. I think they could have found a better middle Bob-omb replacement, okay? I'm sorry, I don't know why I care so much about my boy Chuckya, but I just do. Alpharad has indicated that sometime in around a year or so, another batch of MarioMon will be added to the game in what I'm assuming will be a pretty sizable update. I'm not sure if this means adding MarioMon to pre-existing areas or creating new areas for them to be discovered, but the three that seem to be confirmed for the future are Ninji, Moo, and Gino. And because this is my video, I thought it would be fun to share my totally not biased ideas for captures that I would love to see in a future update for MarioMon. I'm going to try and keep this list somewhat realistic, taking into consideration what would balance the game, such as suggesting more special attackers. This really is an imperfect list though, it's very rough. The only ones I really want are the ones that are towards the end of the list, the top 5 specifically. There are some fairly obvious picks in here. If Alpharad is referencing Mario Kart World, he may also consider Sidestepper as a pretty easy water type. Nabbit could be cool, if maybe a bit redundant, but still cool. Coin Coffer, Conk Door, Rocky Wrench, Dolphin, Sting Bee, and some others would be neat. Sting Bee could evolve into Queen Bee. That could be really easy to implement, potentially a little bit derivative of Vespiquen from Pokemon, given how similar they would probably be. Maybe give Queen Bee the fairy type instead of the flying type to distinguish her a little bit or something. Coin Coffer could also be related to Moneybags in some shape or form, be it a pre-evolution or an evolution. Then again, that would be the kind of evolution that snobs like me would whine about, so I'm not sure. It's also very likely that the team is looking into implementing enemies from Super Mario Wonder. I would imagine that this could be anything from Bull Rush, Hoppo, Wubba, Hoppycat, Mumsy, Pokapede, Skedaddler, Swirlypods, Mackerel, and many more. Bull Rush could be an evolution to Moo. Hoppycat could evolve into the Wonder form, potentially. Maybe they could use the Wonder Seed as an evolution stone for some of these. Or maybe they could use Wonder Seeds as Mega Evolution Stones. Think of it, Wonder Seeds are like kind of temporary, like Mega Stones are. I think that could potentially make sense for Mega versions of some of these enemies. You could take some creative liberties if you really wanted to and go back and imagine some other enemies in their Wonder forms too. Trying to focus on Mario enemies from the past, I have a selection of MarioMon that I think would be cool if they had a little bit more thought put into them than what I'm currently putting into them. Octogoomba, Rockto, and King Caliente sound like a cool evolution line to me. Top Man and Top Maniac sound like some really cool electric types, maybe. You could even have the Tiny Tops if you want 3 stages of evolution. Gringle could be a pre-evolution for Malray, maybe? Then again, Malray is pretty dang good as a single stage. I don't know if I'd want to change that. Snowspike sounds like an Alolan form of Spike. But maybe, I mean, it's a penguin, so that's different. Bone Twister could be a pre-evolution for Twister, probably not necessary though. Glydon sounds like a cool dragon flying or dragon ground or flying ground type. Squiggler is a tiny wiggler guy who comes out of the pipes in one specific level in New Super Mario Bros. Maybe this could be the pre-evolution to Wiggler and could be like an earlier way to get access to Wiggler. Kombu could work as a water grass type if you really wanted one of those. I imagine Kombu being the kind of MarioMon that would not be good competitively, but would make the oceans a little bit more alive with more captures. But at the end of the day, I think this would just end up being seen as filler, so I can see them getting looked over. Ely Mouth is this creepy boss from Super Mario Sunshine. I feel like it's kinda distinct from Malray, but I can see why some people would disagree with me on that. Malray is so perfect as it is, and I can kinda see Ely Mouth getting looked over so that no one steals Malray's thunder, you know what I mean? Beehawse is a good bug grass type, or one of the two. Naplock looks like a cool MarioMon I'd want to catch. I don't know, some Mario and Luigi representation if you want more of that. Shiverian, or whatever these polar bear guys are from Mario Odyssey. That could be a cool ice type that maybe has a high HP stat and a surprisingly high speed stat. I don't know. Block hoppers are interesting. They're like from New Super Mario Bros. And you could give them evolutions if you wanted by just putting more blocks on them. I don't know. Maybe a single evolution would make more sense for them. Treevil feels kinda generic, but it's an easy grass dark / ghost type. Crabber would be a pretty solid evolution to Sidestepper, potentially. Kabam is another one of those one-off New Super Mario Bros. Baddies. Maybe you could give it a custom ability that causes it to self-destruct in a turn if it's hit by a fire type move. If you've played the level, you understand what I'm getting at with this. Jaxie would be cool. Bouldergeist would be another cool legendary. Rock ghost type. Maybe it doesn't deserve legendary status, I don't know, but you probably don't want it to evolve from a Boo Bomb, since we probably don't want capture variants. Maybe it could evolve from this thing, or maybe this could be another form that it takes when it takes too much damage, I don't know. Crober is just Murkrow. We could probably live without it, but it's an idea. Brock Monsieur and Block Doggo. Maybe just the Block Doggo. Maybe the Block Hoppers could evolve into this? That's a bit of a stretch. Torpedo Ted is a pretty easy water steel type. Part of me really wants the Junker from Bowser's Inside Story, and you can have the little trash can minions in the back as pre-evolutions. I don't know though. These guys feel a bit generic. They just look like plain trash cans. I wish they had a little bit more flair to their design, otherwise I feel like they'd be a pretty easy pick. Fire Snake probably should have already made it in. They're in a lot of games and it's a pretty easy extra fire type. Mouser, Skip Squeak, Squeak. There's a few mouse baddies we have. Mouser would be great for sure, but its pre-evolution would either be the Super Mario 3D World Skip Squeak or the Squeaks from Paper Mario. I think the Squeaks would be better and make more sense. They could be solid dark types. Electrokoopa seems like a pretty easy electric type to me. Snoozakoopa gives off like some Slowbro vibes to me, you know what I mean? Clamber could be a cool bug type, maybe, if you want another one of those. Moai would be neat. Maybe a rock psychic type? And maybe he could evolve into Knuckleodic, who could drop the rock type for an ice type, or keep the rock type? I don't know. Maybe those two should be separated, actually. Maybe they shouldn't evolve into each other. I don't know. They both seem cool, but I'd prefer Moai over Knuckleotic if I had to choose between the two. Bugaboom and Mandibug is a pretty easy evolution if you want an extra bug type in your roster. Bramble should probably already be in the game. Maybe it's a good grass or grass bug type. And why does this thing give off the vibe of being a good VGC kind of capture? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what it looks like. Mecha Wiggler would be a really cool legendary to catch, in my opinion. iRock would make me so happy as a Super Mario 64 fan. I could understand if you decided to skip over this one, but it would make me happy. And does anybody like Toxbox? Anybody? Does anybody even consider them to be a bad guy, or are they just like environmental hazards? I don't know. I like I like Toxbox, okay? I'd be happy if I got a Toxbox. There would be at least one person happy to see Toxbox in the game. I think that the Steam Gardeners would be like the best Mario Odyssey race that's like capture worthy. Maybe you could make a case for the Silverware guys too if you really wanted. Fire Chomp, okay? Fire Chomp would be a really cool fire fairy type with levitate. That's how I see it. Can anyone else kind of see the fairy type? Maybe that's just me. I want fire chomps though. Bring us some fire chomps. And they also shouldn't evolve into chain chomps. They're different. They're completely different. Ballyhoo would be really funny. This could also just be another character. You know what? I could imagine him being a gym leader and having the gym be a game of Mario Party. But I mean, he'd be a cool capture too, if you really wanted. Okay, we're down to the top 5, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, these These top 5 are probably my most wanted out of all of them. So if you're going to give me any, these are the ones that I really, really want. Okay, these are the ones that I really, really want. Okay, the Loch Ness Monster Dory. Dory is like the perfect Lapras replacement for MarioMon. Kinda surprised Dory isn't already here. Maybe a water dragon, maybe just water, maybe water dark. I just, maybe water fairy. I just think that she deserves to be in the game. Phanta Manta from Super Mario Sunshine. Maybe a ghost electric type, because the goo they spread is electric. Maybe their evasion goes up if they get hit with a water type move. Custom abilities? I don't know. I really want this guy in the game. I really want him. Midbus / Blizzard Midbus. Maybe this would be better as a trainer or a character or something, but I like the idea of Midbus being in this game somehow. Maybe they don't even have to evolve into Blizzard Midbus. Maybe they do. That'd be cool either way. I just think Midbus would be cool. Rob. Hear me out, okay? This is post-game. He's in Mario Kart DS. He's a Mario character. I know that when I was talking about Sonic earlier, I said that you can't go overboard on Mario characters like this, but I think that Rob, you could get away with. Please, just do Rob. And my final wish is for Snailicorn from New Super Mario Bros. I don't know why. I want Snailicorn. He lives in my head rent-free. Nobody loves him. He's like the first enemy that I think of when I think of obscure Mario enemies. He lives in snowy areas, so you could give him an ice type, but he also doesn't have any ice abilities, so maybe just make him a steel type, or make him a steel fairy if you wanted to. I think that Snailicorn is a great candidate for like a steel fairy type if you really wanted to do that. And you could give him the heat proof ability because you can't kill him with fireballs in New Super Mario Bros. Yeah, I don't know why I want him. I do. I really want Snailicorn. Please give me Snailicorn. Okay, that was fun. Very flawed, but fun. I'm sure that some of those are being considered without my input. I have no experience in designing games or balancing games, but I love Mario enemies, and I thought that I would share some ideas that I would have brought to the table. I will probably love whatever they add to the game. I'd also love to hear what ideas you have for MarioMon in the comments, by the way, so send them off. MarioMon doesn't just have captures, mind you. There is a lot to say about the Mario representation in the worlds, music, characters, and Easter eggs. I don't want to put my magnifying glass up to these things as much, however. I don't think they'd benefit from my snobby critiques. Even if I would have personally gone in several different creative directions, the main path that the player follows is perfectly suitable as a conduit for these captures to come to life. And I think that's what really matters. I'm so grateful that this ROM hack exists. It gave me so much joy, and I could sense the love poured into each of these captures. Each capture, each sprite, each move they learn through level up, each cry, each detail about their typing, stats, abilities, dex entries, and so much more scream passion in a way that really touched me personally. I hope it's been made clear that any criticisms that I've given in this video come from a place of love and admiration. I can look over basically everything I feel is wrong with this game. This game has been such a wonderful reminder to me that if you put your whole heart into something, sometimes the flaws, as ever-present as they may be, fall by the wayside when the passion is strong enough. I'm thankful for the reminder that passion sometimes just triumphs over all in the end. Thanks for watching.